We are today with Lakshmi Kumar, Policy Director for Global Financial Integrity. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Maria. It's always a pleasure to chat.
Today we're going to discuss with you a report that you wrote with your colleague Julia Jansura, Program Manager, Latin America and Caribbean for Global Financial Integrity. Is a report about narcotics-related illicit financial flows between the United States, Mexico, and Colombia. This report was commissioned by the Western Hemisphere Drug Policy Commission. So what is the problem? I mean, we have Colombia, which is a country producing cocaine, heroin too, but in a very small amount, mostly cocaine, and Mexico, where heroin production is dropping this last month, and fentanyl production is booming. And this is a big problem for the United States. And first of all, we are talking about what kind of amount of money, what is the value of this trafficking?
As you could see sort of from our report, we use sort of, several different estimating methods. We've estimated it by estimating it on this, when you see on the supply side, we reach an amount which is between the three countries of sort of 42.3 billion. If we were to use another estimating method, which is really to sort of use sort of, annual flow based on sort of consumers, the number of sort of, users of it, average user, estimated percentages, then we sort of see a value as a middling value of sort of, $82.2 billion. And then if we sort of see based on how much is being seized annually in the country, whether it's cocaine, heroin, marijuana, methamphetamines, or fentanyl, we're again sort of looking at a mid-value range of sort of 83 billion. And so, so on the whole, and then sort of the most sort of, common estimate that sometimes used as a percentage of sort of GDP, which when we sort of look at that, you see sort of high values of sort of, 154.7 billion and low values of sort of 88.4, with sort of a middling value of sort of 121.6. So somewhere between, we are really looking at numbers that are well over sort of $80 billion in terms of sort of narcotics proceeds that flow through this.
Which is huge. Judge Falcone, the Italian anti-mafia judge, say, follow the money and you will find the truth. So if we follow the money of the narco cartels from Mexico and Colombia, what kind of illicit flows we can analyze, and they are going directly to the United States, or we have all the Caribbean parts of the story?
So, the thing with drug proceeds often is they take various forms. You definitely see sort of schemes where there is direct repatriation between sort of Colombia to Mexico, from the United States back into Colombia, and sort of from the United States back into Mexico. But we were also seeing cases where sort of, Mexican drug cartels, there are examples of them using sort of, virtual currency or cryptocurrency uses based out of China. So it really depends on sort of, what the method is. Sometimes we see sort of, illicit drug proceeds, especially the ones going to sort of Colombia, that are being routed through Panama and then making its way back. So there are sort of several permutation and combinations through which the scheme can work. But especially in the case of sort of Mexico, it is right across the border. It is a land border. So you see a lot more sort of, if you sort of historically have seen movements of bulk cash smuggling, but exactly. more and more US reports, what they are finding is that they're actually seeing a reduction in the number of seizures and bulk cash smuggling. And some of the reasons for that are the assumption that instead of just going across the border, the money or proceeds are maybe being flown across the private aircrafts. And so they may be landing at an intermediate point or a transit point before making its way. And often, sometimes with the case of trade, if the money is being routed through trade-based money laundering, it will again, for the sake of sort of, to avoid detection, again, go through an intermediate point as well. So I think, you have to understand that this, it is a very globally connected network. And I think one of the favorite examples that we saw from doing our report is that we saw the Colombian drug cartels were moving their product through an African country to get to European markets, and or they've also been cases where they've routed their money through Dubai. You know, you do have extreme sort of fringe cases like that, but it is important when you do a risk assessment to not just think of, you know, this is a US, Mexico, and a Colombian issue, but to see sort of the transit points, which often, you know, touch Central America, some touch the Caribbean, but also sort of the laundering points, which can sort of often touch the Middle East or other parts of the world. That so it's important to think of the risk both in terms of the movement of the drugs, but also the risk when you then see in terms of the movement of money and the repatriation of money, and where jurisdictionally those risks are.
Yeah, and also the role of several facilitators, financial facilitators, accountant facilitators. So it means that really they are very sophisticated schemes. What about money houses? I ask you this because money houses for terrorism financing played an important role at the triple border. So money houses in your research play an important role, or do you think that the role is limited?
So, you know, let me put it this way. Anything can be used to sort of, you know, essentially act as a way to move money back. And I think you and I have had this conversation before with remittance houses, is that remittance also, more than anything else, serve a very important service of being able for sort of, you know, economic migrants to be able to send money back home. And I think if you go back to 9/11, yes, there is a risk, but this notion that remittance houses are purely used for illegal activities is false. There is a huge, the largest component of it is to send remittance back, or sort of, you know, individuals that work in the US to send money back. There is always a risk, but I think we lose sight of the problem by just focusing on that one risk. There are so many avenues through which, and I think it's important to sort of, you know, think more broadly, and that is a better, I think, you know, there's historically maybe sort of this attitude that it's always informal remittance networks as sort of, you know, maybe lost sight of other more lucrative methods like trade-based money laundering that don't get attention, but are also equally easy for drug cartels to help move money.
Before talking about the policy recommendations for the United States, I would like just to ask you this. Fentanyl is booming, the production of fentanyl is booming in Mexico. I interviewed with several people from Mexico or Mexico related. They told me that the fentanyl system is not yet clear. I mean, there are a lot of elements in terms of the production scheme, of the money that is involved with, that are unknown. Do you think that the fentanyl market could change also the money laundering paradigms? Or
so I think the thing with fentanyl is also the movement of the drugs has been different. You've seen fentanyl being shipped in through sort of mail services, directly through the mail. And so for that, the entry of drugs has been a little different in terms of sort of how some of it has come. I think for the difference in money laundering methods to sort of be identified, you have to sort of see, I think you have to ask ourselves the question, why should there be a difference in the money laundering methods? Is the nature of the drug itself such that it requires a different money laundering method? I'm not sure. So a lot of the transactions in the case of fentanyl sometimes have occurred. I think there are examples of it having happened online as well.
China is involved with it. We have new players. That's the point.
Yeah, and so, you know, so I think what you will see is you will definitely see a duplication of existing methods, but in different jurisdictions. So when you're talking about sort of, let's say, are they using informal remittance networks? They possibly are, but maybe they're using it. But you'll also see you're seeing a lot of the rise of sort of, you know, online payments through this, and sort of the use of cryptocurrency, which is being routed through China. So that is something new. But what happens is, you know, when you see one criminal element do it, you will often see others copy it. So I think you can definitely point to sort of things that might be unique to China. I think it's a great question. But I think on the whole, I think you're better off saying these are a broad set of, you know, channels of vehicles through which, laundering takes place, and then sort of, circumscribing it to what you see as particularly high risk for each jurisdiction. I'm not sure if it's the drug as much as the jurisdiction that's involved that really makes it.
Yeah, it's an interesting remark. So let's talk about the United States. What United States can do to limit the problem, because it's a huge problem that go through the financial system, the official financial system, the real estate market. I mean,
so that's a great question. And so what I would say is that what the purpose of our report is really to focus on what financial tools and tools that target the trade system can do to sort of better address the problem. But the nature, the causes, effects and consequences of the legal production and the movement of drugs are myriad. So the financial lens is one part of it, but to sort of truly address the problem, I think you have to have a more robust policy of the fact that there's sort of economic inequality in these countries, making sure you provide people sort of alternate livelihood means. On the other hand, sort of users in the US need sort of better healthcare and better drug rehab. So there is a whole panoply of tools that we have to think. We focus on a really narrow slice. That's a slice that can help, but on its own, it cannot succeed unless you have all these other, you have a more holistic approach that brings together various things to address the problem. And I think that's something we have made very clear in our report in various places.
Yeah, exactly. You give to the reader a lot of information about your policy recommendation. For example, a more active role from FinCEN.
Yeah, so we've suggested a whole host of things. What we have done is we've sort of looked at the policy recommendations essentially as two tiers. One, which is sort of what can be done through the financial system, but more secondly, what can be done through the trade system, because there is an overlap between the two, and the recommendations are not always the same. For example, like in the US, we're now trying to pass beneficial ownership legislation, but what we're also seeing is that aircrafts and speedboats are regularly used to traffic. And, we have examples of, 50 aircrafts being abandoned after a drug haul. And very often these aircrafts are registered in the names of, trusts, LLCs. You're not able to go back and trace it. So being able to trace these assets are important. Additionally, we talk about sort of, better understanding trade-based money laundering in the US. Right now, internationally, trade-based money laundering occurs in a very piecemeal fashion. A real emphasis on developing a full set of policy measures and equipping sort of, the customs side in the US of tools and risk assessments that understand the risks of TBML. A lot of this moves through free zones, both in sort of, Panama, and also, with free trade zones and free zones in Colombia. We just don't know what's going on because there's been no work done. So I think that there has to be sort of an assessment, not just from the US side, but I think the real need of the hour is sort of better cooperation and working together to understand some of these risks, because these risks work off each other. If it's a risk in Colombia, then it immediately affects the US. And if there's a gap in the US, it affects Colombia with a lot of this. So I think for both countries to sort of work together and understand the risks in the context of narcotics trafficking is critical to sort of finding solutions. And this is not to say there is already cooperation ongoing. I think we're just trying to highlight other avenues that perhaps are untapped, and that there are sort of real pathways there for improvement.
And I hope that your report could be the first part of a larger research, including also countries like Venezuela. Why I'm saying that? Because as you know, historically, Colombia and Venezuela are osmotic. Okay, and in this particular moment, what happens in Colombia as a kind of echo in Venezuela, and the opposite. So I feel that your report is important, and I really hope that it could be the beginning of a larger analysis about money laundering in Latin America, which remains, in my opinion, the most critical issue for the area. Not only for the United States, but for everybody around the world.
So you raise an excellent point. I know, and I think we felt to sort of do this issue justice, you'd also have to really thoroughly cover the Central American countries, which, because they're sort of also very key. They play a very critical role in sort of the architecture and a facilitative role in sort of narcotics trafficking. We were, however, when we were commissioned to do it, sadly we were restricted by Colombia, Mexico, and the US. But you're 100%
It's
correct.
just a wish.
No. And I think we are cognizant that if there is interest and there's someone else that would love it, we would be very happy to take on the task, because to sort of truly flesh out this, that's something you're going to need as well.
Thank you for joining us, and thank you for your contribution.